might be the better way to go forward, councillors, and basically give us an opportunity not to over-relitigate this issue, given the fact that it's had 2 really heavy-duty assessments around this table and in the IHP, and then try and challenge our officers to come back, say, in the next month with a set,
but enabling set of consenting conditions.
A set of criteria that would enable, better enable our community in assisting them in addressing some of their excessive mangrove problems. Councillor Kell?
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor, and yeah, that's a step in the right direction, because I wasn't going to relitigate some of my speeches I've done in the last 5.5 years.
I like those speeches, though. They're quite good.
But, you know, when you talk about sediment, you talk about silt. I've heard some discussions here this morning.
Councillor Kell, you're in danger of relitigating what you were telling us.
Yeah, but it's about the arduous process for the communities. You know, the communities, you round those communities up and they get engaged, and it takes a long-winded process, 10 years or more.
Yeah, so what I'm suggesting is that we challenge the officers to actually come back to us in the next month, 6 weeks, in the short term. Except rather than go into battle and try and construct a whole different portfolio of framework, accept what these guys have come back to us with, but then ask the officers to come back over the next 6 to 8 weeks with a new framework for supporting community in ensuring that we can assist them if they want to do mangrove reduction.
Right, so Mr Mayor, I'll finish off my last few words, because I can take you out the south here, I can show you where the golden sand's coming back in, I can show you where the fish life and the bird life's increased.
Yeah, they're right over the road.
Correct.
Yeah, beautiful.
So are you going to ask us to how we handle this if we've got new wording that's essentially you're asking us to support this in principle?
Do the work.
What we'd be doing,
we have got some assistance here.
what we would be doing, Mr Chair, is this is an operational response to the acceptance of the IHP position. So you won't be waiting for more unitary plan recommendations. It's how we respond operationally to enable people to access a consent in the most appropriate way. That does actually reflect the way we have been working operationally in the last 2 or 3 years anyway. So this would just formalise that.
Okay.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see the wording, because accessing the consent in the most appropriate way.
We are
what's
just
appropriate?
drafting up some useful words. Report back. Stephen, how quickly might you be able to report back into the committee structure?
Being mindful of the election period that we're in, Mr Chair, I would just leave it for us to present to the new council. They'll have questions about mangrove removal, so we should do this in November.
Okay. That's fair enough. Yep. To the incoming council, that's good. All right, well, I think that's sort of, for me, that gives a direction that covers off both bases. Probably not enough details, but it'll do. You're all right with that? So we've got the mover. Councillor Chris, are you okay with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. Okay, and so Councillor Clow from the foe will second. Okay, now can we go on to the next matter, B, houseboats? No? Sure.
All right, thank you, Mr Mayor. So page 51 of your agenda, just some context in the proposed unitary plan. In the general coastal marine area, houseboats were listed as a full discretionary activity. As an exception to that, to recognise, I think, 4 existing houseboats on Waiheke, there was a separate provision for those boats, enabling them to exist where they currently are. So the panel has, again, looked at this very carefully. In their view, the whole issue of houseboats is better managed through resource consent requirements around new moorings in the general coastal marine area, and then within the mooring zones themselves, and across the general coastal marine area, controls over discharges from vessels. So I guess one of the key concerns perhaps with houseboats would be illegal discharging of effluent into the coastal marine area. That's probably one of the significant concerns. And also in terms of new houseboats, their impact on marine navigation or other sensitive aspects of the coastal environment. So the panel is saying there are controls in the unitary plan that deal with those issues already. Discretionary activity for new moorings in the general coastal marine area, controls over discharges from vessels. So with those in place, the panel has recommended that there are no specific provisions for houseboats in the unitary plan.
Right. Councillor John?
Just a question, in terms of privately owned canals and waterways, none of this applies to houseboats. They have a far more permissive regime. I'm thinking of private canals where it's actually not in the coastal marine area as such.
Well, Mr. Chair, that's the issue really, a technical question around whether they're within the coastal marine area or not. I would just have to check with our coastal expert. If they are in the coastal marine area, then they would be subject to those controls around discretionary activity for new moorings, controls over discharges, man-made artificial canals privately owned. Kath, can you confirm?
Yep. Where the land remains in private ownership, it's not in the common marine and coastal area, which is different to the coastal marine area. So the common area is the public coastal marine area. But the plan does have specific provisions for Gulf Harbour, so that's got marine berths already there. So berths there are permitted.
Yeah.
With the waterways at Clevedon, the submitters wrote provisions there saying that they would need an occupation consent. We opposed that. We didn't rewrite the provisions for them. They don't need an occupation consent. They would need, if they build before they flood the new canals, they could build that as a land use. If they build marina berths after they flood the canal, then it is coastal marine area, and they need a consent for the construction of those new structures, but not for its occupation because it's not common marine and coastal area.
So, this is Kath Coombs. Good. Kath? Any other questions of Kath while she's here? This is her big moment. Well done, Kath, thank you. Any other questions or comments on this one? Right, we'll move on to C. Technical challenges.
Yeah, now we have the two technical issues that we've picked up that we feel Council should really address at this point rather than leave till a later date. The first one is in relation to discharges of hull biofouling organisms. Quite a mouthful, but essentially cleaning boats of foul that's gathered on their hulls. There are provisions, as there should very well be, in the unitary plan dealing with how hull biofouling organisms are removed through an extensive mediation exercise involving the Ministry of Primary Industries, who have a significant role to play in terms of biosecurity in the coastal marine area, involving the Port of Auckland, and also involving recreational boating users. A package of controls were agreed upon that had a tiered approach to the removal of biofouling organisms, with more restrictive controls on very significant removals from large vessels with a significant amount of biofoul gathered on them, and then more enabling provisions for recreational boat users for minor cleaning. So we had quite a sophisticated approach. The panel has come back with a set of standards that would apply to all those different categories, from the significant removal to the minor removal of biofoul, and our experts really are of the view that we should stick with the approach that was agreed with a number of parties in the mediation, having that different tiered approach, and we have recommended some amendments to essentially go back to the Council's case at the hearings.
All right, biofoul. Okay, move on to the next.
And last but not least, in the coastal plan, a technical issue just around definitions of seawalls. The panel has included seawalls under two different categories, and that just causes some confusion in terms of what activity status seawalls might have in different parts of the coastal marine area. Kath Coombs has looked at this very carefully and feels that we should have a single definition, and we have recommended provisions that would clarify that single definition.
Right?
And that's it for the regional coastal plan. Otherwise, the panel has accepted the council's.
Okay, so I'll move
Case.
the two technical items.
Question.
Oh, Councillor Chris?
There is a recommendation which I want to make sure has been tracked through, and it's a recommendation under coastal occupation charging, and the recommendation is very clear from the IHP that it recommends the council establish a coastal occupation charging regime. Now, my question is this a planning matter for the unitary plan, or is it a recommendation from the IHP that is outside of the unitary plan? Because I can't see how it tracks, at this stage, I can't see how it tracks into the unitary plan.
So Kath may have a comment shortly, Mr Mayor, but in the first instance, there are a number of recommendations throughout the panel's reports that are not directly related to the council's role now to accept or reject. They are recommendations to perhaps investigate or do things in the future, and this falls into that category. So we do explain in the agenda report that this report is just dealing with the pure statutory requirement now to accept or reject recommendations specifically on the proposed unitary plan, not something the council may or may not do in the future. So we're very focused on this report in this forum right now on the accept and the reject of plan provisions, not
Okay.
of other suggestions from the panel of things that would be a good idea in the future.
So this will be getting picked up outside of the plan.
That's our intention, Mr Mayor, is to...
It gets bundled with all those other things,
Yeah.
all the other recommendations which aren't resource management issues.
Yeah, and some of those things we're still working our way through in terms of officers' view on those non-unitary plan directly related recommendations from the panel. But the idea would be to bring a report to the relevant committee again for the new incoming council.
So, Mr Mayor, my question is, there's a number of these recommendations which aren't linked to the unitary plan. They are issues that have been raised through hearings process, and a number of parties recommended coastal charging regime. So where do we track and get a record of that so that we know that there's a work stream, multiple work streams I imagine, that are in some ways the secondary recommendations of the IHP? Is that going to be bundled for us in this meeting as ancillary recommendations, or is it going to be coming on a report another place another time?
There won't be ancillary recommendations, so I suspect that it will be a part of further reporting process.
So the intention is to pull together a report and report it to the incoming council, because I think it's important that we take the suggestions or ideas from the panel and give the incoming council a bit of background about how you might go about some of those things, what might be the cost of doing it, and so it's much better to do that in a comprehensive way once the incoming council is ready to consider those matters. Because some of them do require additional costs of council, and we need to be sure that the council is happy for staff to go ahead and do that work.
Thank you. Though in this case it would be a revenue generating one.
Sure, yeah.
Oh, that sounds good. Okay, right, councillors, so we have got the 4 recommendations. They have all been moved. Second to those, to the last 2? Right, thank you, Councillor Arthur. Are you okay with me putting them as a group?
Oh, Mr. Chair, on the mangrove one,
Yeah.
I certainly want you to put that as a separate, as a division. Look, my belief is if you supported the council's position in the proposed unitary plan of mangrove removal as a permitted activity in areas that where there were free of mangroves in 1996, then you'll vote against this. I hear what the Chief Executive has said, that he's going to give an operational response, but he also said that the response will just reaffirm the organisation's existing practices and policies around dealing with communities. There's no way that we can short-circuit or circumvent the Resource Management Act and the resource consenting process other than offer some operational support that's already in place. So I'm calling a division on A because I believe it should not, as stand by the council position, that it should not require resource consent around that 1996 threshold, and we should stick to our guns and ensure and support mangrove removal being a permitted activity.